Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're covering 4 major developments that just dropped in the Nolan Wells case, and I'm telling you, every single one of them changes how we have to look at what happened on Horn Island. The FBI has finally gone on record, in writing, explaining exactly what their role is in this investigation. Katie, the young woman at the center of the biggest unanswered question in this case, has broken her silence, and I'm not talking about through a family member or some secondhand Facebook post. She sat down face-to-face with Nolan's own mother. We've also got breaking information about threats serious enough that federal resources got involved. And all of this is happening right as this family prepares to do something no parent should ever have to do. For weeks, the question of exactly why the FBI was involved in this case had only been answered in pieces. A line here, a comment there. This week, the Bureau's Jackson field office released a complete public statement, and it's worth hearing in full. The statement says that while the FBI has assisted with certain aspects of the investigation using federal tools and partnerships that have proved valuable, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office is leading and will continue to lead this investigation. It describes a trusting, effective partnership between Jackson County and the FBI built over years of working side by side on complex cases. It says the FBI has been supporting Jackson County from day one in the effort to gather information and find answers for the Wells family and the broader community. And it closes by saying the FBI remains ready to assist further, particularly where federal resources might expand local capacity, in the hope of bringing clarity and peace of mind to the people who love Nolan. Let me pause here, because the tone of that statement matters almost as much as what it actually says. This isn't some dramatic press release announcing a breakthrough or a major escalation. It reads almost like a reassurance, careful, measured, explicitly designed to lower the temperature around a question that had been generating real anxiety for days. Somebody at that field office clearly understood that unexplained federal involvement was doing more to fuel speculation than silence ever could, and they chose to address it directly in writing rather than let rumors keep filling that gap. That matters because up until now, a lot of speculation had filled the space where an actual answer should have been. Some people treated FBI involvement as proof the case had been quietly escalated into something way more serious. Other people treated the Bureau's presence as evidence of a cover-up in progress, like federal agents were supposedly stepping in to manage the story rather than investigate it. This statement doesn't support either of those reads. It confirms real, meaningful federal involvement, tools, partnerships, expertise, while explicitly stating Jackson County remains the lead agency, start to finish. It's support, not command. That distinction is worth holding on to every time this case gets discussed going forward. If you assumed the FBI had quietly taken this case over, drop a W in the comments. If you assume the opposite, drop no way. I want to see where this comment section actually lands. Buried inside that same statement is the actual reason federal resources got pulled into this case at all. The FBI says its efforts have specifically focused on interstate threats received by individuals connected to this matter, and that this work is running in parallel with the family's own independent investigation, not merged into it. That's the clearest, most official confirmation yet of something we've touched on before. Federal involvement here isn't about Nolan's death directly. It's about protecting people connected to this story from threats serious enough to cross state lines and become a federal matter in their own right. For a threat to become a federal matter simply by crossing state lines, it typically means someone in one state sends something threatening to someone in another. A message, a call, a piece of mail, using channels that inherently cross jurisdictional boundaries. The internet, chief among them. That's exactly the kind of thing the FBI is built to handle, regardless of how large or small the underlying case actually is. It doesn't require Nolan's death itself to be treated as a federal matter. It only requires that somebody somewhere used interstate channels to threaten somebody else connected to this story. Here's what's just as important. The FBI's statement does not specify what those threats actually said or who specifically received them. Reporting on this same statement has noted plainly that it remains unclear exactly what kind of threats were made or who was on the receiving end. That gap matters because separate, unofficial reporting has circulated specific, graphic claims about threats sent to at least one family connected to this case, a family tied to one of the boys who was on that boat. Those specific details have not been confirmed through any official statement from the FBI, from Jackson County, or from anyone with actual authority to verify them. I want to be precise about that distinction. We know officially that interstate threats occurred and that federal resources are addressing them. We do not have official confirmation of the specific content of any threat or exactly who received it. Both things are true, and it's important not to blur them together. There's a reason official statements tend to stay vague on exactly this kind of detail, even when the underlying facts are serious and real. Naming specific victims or repeating specific threatening language in a public statement can itself cause additional harm, drawing more attention to the very people the investigation is trying to protect and potentially compromising whatever legal action might eventually follow against whoever sent those threats. That restraint, even if it leaves the public with less detail than they might want, is often a deliberate protective choice, not an attempt to minimize what actually happened. Let me be real with you about what we do know. Nolan's mother has said that she and her husband received anonymous hate mail targeting their own legal team, arriving in the middle of planning their 18-year-old son's funeral. Not weeks later, not after the story faded, while they were choosing a church and a eulogy. That's where this part of the story has to start, because it's the clearest example of what's happening underneath the headlines. Real people, already living through the worst thing that's ever happened to them, being targeted for it. Separate from everything else, reporting has emerged describing threats received by other people connected to this case too, specific enough in content that they fall within the kind of interstate threats the FBI has confirmed it's addressing. What we do have on the record, Nolan's friend Trayvon Shepard has said publicly that he and others have been getting threats online since the case drew national attention. Jackson County Chancery Judge Ashley Cole, stepmother of one of the boys who was on the boat with Nolan, has said on Facebook that she and her family have received a wave of death threats. That's more than a vague official statement. These are specific, named people describing specific experiences. But the exact content of any individual threat, beyond what these individuals have chosen to share themselves, hasn't been independently confirmed by an official source. The responsible thing to do is treat it as credible because it's coming directly from the people who say it happened to them, without treating every detail as settled fact, and without repeating graphic language just because it's circulating. What is beyond dispute is this: whoever is sending threats to anyone connected to this case, regardless of what they believe happened to Nolan, is committing a serious crime. Grief, suspicion, and public pressure do not grant anyone permission to threaten a teenager, a parent, a judge, or anyone else. That's true regardless of exactly whose name attaches to which specific threat. It's worth thinking, too, about the broader effect this has on a case like this one. Every witness in this story, every friend, every family member, every young person who happened to be on that boat or near it, is watching this unfold in real time. If coming forward or simply being named publicly carries the risk of threats serious enough to draw federal attention, that's a real chilling effect on anyone who might otherwise be willing to speak up with information that could actually help. Protecting people from that kind of retaliation isn't just a matter of basic decency. It's directly connected to whether this investigation can actually get the full cooperation it needs. Now let's talk about what might be the biggest development this week. Katie, the young woman Nolan spoke with in his final confirmed minutes on that beach, has finally been heard from directly. Not through a relative's Facebook post, through an actual in-person meeting with Nolan's own mother. According to Christine, she and Katie sat down together face to face. And Christine has said plainly that what Katie told her does not match the story she's been hearing from everyone else. This is a real shift from where this case stood even a week ago. Up until now, everything attributed to Katie had arrived through intermediaries. First through a family friend relaying what she'd heard secondhand, then through Katie's own mother and sister posting on Facebook to correct rumors that had spiraled out of control. Each of those accounts was filtered, understandably, through someone else's memory of what Katie had said, rather than coming from a direct conversation with the one person who actually has first-hand knowledge of Nolan's final confirmed words. A face-to-face meeting between Katie and Christine changes that entirely. As far as we know, this is the first time information about that conversation has traveled directly from the person who lived it to the person who needs to understand it most, without anyone else standing in between. Let me walk through this carefully because Katie's actual account is more specific and more limited than a lot of the public conversation around it has suggested. According to Christine, Katie has been consistent from the very beginning. She and Nolan met that day, spent time together, and eventually parted ways. Katie then got back on a boat with her own friends, separate from Nolan's group. She assumed, based on their conversation, that Nolan was heading back to rejoin his own friend's boat. Here's the detail that matters most. Katie never actually saw Nolan get on that boat. She assumed it based on what he told her, but she did not personally witness him rejoining his friends. If you caught that nuance the first time this story broke, drop the word assumed in the comments. That distinction is genuinely important. It means Katie's account isn't a direct eyewitness contradiction of the friend group's story in the sense of her having seen one thing while they claim another. It's closer to this. Nolan told her his intention. Whether he actually followed through on that intention before whatever happened next is something nobody, not Katie, not the friends, not the family, can currently confirm firsthand. Both an assumption based on a genuine conversation and a claim that he chose to stay can technically be true at different moments if something changed between the conversation and whatever came after it. I think it's worth sitting with why this nuance got flattened so quickly in a lot of public coverage of this case. A clean contradiction, one witness says this, another says that, makes for a much more compelling story than an account built around an honest assumption. But Katie's actual position, as relayed by Christine, is more measured than that. She's not claiming she watched Nolan walk away from her and board a boat. She's saying he told her a plan and she had every reason to believe he'd follow through on it. That's a meaningfully different kind of testimony than a direct eyewitness account, and it deserves to be treated as such. This also reframes, at least somewhat, what actually needs to be explained. If Katie's account is accurate, the real mystery isn't whether Nolan wanted to leave. It's what happened in the gap between him stating that intention and whatever came next. A gap that, as of right now, nobody has been able to account for. Drop the word gap in the comments if this is the detail you keep coming back to as well. Now let's talk about something this case hasn't had until recently, a minute-by-minute reconstruction of July 4th that doesn't rely on anyone's memory of a chaotic afternoon. According to GPS records later obtained from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the boat carrying Nolan's group left its dock at approximately 9:56 a.m. It arrived at Horn Island at 11:14 a.m., a trip of a little over an hour across open water. Nothing about either of those timestamps raises a single question. It's an ordinary holiday morning departure to an island that group had visited before. The last confirmed sighting of Nolan alive places him on Horn Island around 3 p.m. that afternoon. At around that same hour, according to dispatch audio later obtained through a public records request, someone aboard the group's boat placed a call for towing assistance. The recording is short, but it's one of the very few pieces of evidence in this entire case that exists independently of anyone's memory. The boat's bilge pump, the mechanical system that keeps water from accumulating inside the hull, had failed. The vessel was taking on water. This detail matters a great deal, and it's worth being precise about why. For nearly 2 weeks, the explanation for why the group left Horn Island rested almost entirely on one public source, a statement from Jackson County Chancery Court Judge Ashley Cole, whose son Warren had been on the boat with Nolan that day. In a public post, she said the group left around 4:30 because of mechanical failure, that her son last saw Nolan around 3, and that Nolan made his own decision to stay behind, planning to catch a ride back to the mainland later with a different group of friends he'd met on the island that day. When that statement first posted, none of it could be independently verified. It was one mother's account, relayed secondhand to the public. It deserved to be treated exactly that way at the time, not dismissed outright, and not treated as settled fact either. Some of it now has real independent corroboration. The dispatch audio, recorded in real time, hours before anyone on Earth knew Nolan would go missing, confirms that the mechanical failure genuinely happened. Nobody invents a boat emergency in advance of a disappearance that hasn't occurred yet. That specific part of the account holds up under scrutiny, and any honest accounting of this case has to say so plainly. The GPS data tells a closely aligned story from a completely different angle. According to the records, the boat left Horn Island at 4:31 p.m., nearly matching Judge Cole's account almost to the minute. It returned to its original departure dock at approximately 5:44 p.m., after apparently being towed for several miles at reduced speed before picking back up to a normal cruising speed less than an hour later. So here is what is confirmed, and it's important to separate this clearly from what is not confirmed. Confirmed. The boat had a genuine documented mechanical failure that afternoon. It left the island without Nolan at approximately 4:31 p.m. It returned to a mainland dock a little over an hour later. Not confirmed. Why Nolan wasn't aboard when it left, whether he stayed by his own choice, as his friends' families have said, or whether the circumstances were more complicated than that. What actually happened on that beach during the roughly 90 minutes between the 3 p.m. distress call and the 4:31 p.m. departure? That 90-minute gap is, in a real sense, where this entire investigation still lives. When the boat pulled back into that dock and Nolan wasn't on it, nobody called Christine right away. Not by every account available, because anyone was trying to hide anything, but because this same group had made this same trip before, and an evening without word from an 18-year-old on a holiday weekend wasn't yet, in anyone's mind, a crisis. That changed. Just after 11 that night, when Christine's phone rang. It wasn't Nolan. It was one of his friends. She said publicly, more than once, that this was the moment something inside her shifted, that Nolan's friend simply didn't call her directly like that under ordinary circumstances. Around that same hour, Warren Cole, according to public reporting, placed a call of his own to the United States Coast Guard to report Nolan missing. The Coast Guard's response, as later reported, was that the situation as described to them that night didn't meet the threshold for immediate deployment. No cutter went out. No aircraft went up that night. It was the kind of call that gets logged and closed within minutes. That decision, made in the very first hour anyone official was told something was wrong, would later become one of the quieter but more consequential details in this entire timeline, because it meant real hours passed before any organized search response began. Christine spent the next stretch of that night trying to track her son down herself before turning fully to law enforcement. When she finally did, she ran into a problem nobody had warned her about. Horn Island sits out in the Mississippi Sound, and exactly which agency held jurisdiction over a missing person case originating there wasn't immediately clear to anyone she spoke with. She's described a frustrating back and forth between departments before the Jackson County Sheriff's Office finally agreed to open a formal report. Later that night, she and Elmore met a deputy in a McDonald's parking lot and laid out everything they knew. By morning, Elmore couldn't wait on process. He took his own boat out on July 5th and searched near Horn Island himself. A father, combing open water, while in parallel an organized search effort was standing up on shore. A command post was established at the Lake Mars boat launch in Ocean Springs, and the search grew quickly to include the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, the United States Coast Guard, and the United Cajun Navy, a volunteer search and rescue organization. The Cajun Navy's incident commander, Josh Gill, has said the organization heard directly from Nolan's mother and moved fast, deploying boats, drones, and personnel within hours. For 2 full days, that search covered land and water around Horn Island with no result. Then, early on the morning of Monday, July 6th, at approximately 8:45 a.m., a National Park Service ranger spotted a body in the water along the island's northwestern shore. Sheriff John Ledbetter confirmed it matched the description investigators had circulated for Nolan Wells. The search for Nolan Wells was over. The search for what actually happened to him on that island was only just beginning. At the center of nearly every unanswered question in this case sits one piece of pending evidence: the cause and manner of Nolan's death, which has not yet been officially confirmed by either medical process currently underway. The state autopsy was carried out on July 7th at the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. Investigators have said there is currently no indication of drug or alcohol involvement, though officials have been clear that this reading is preliminary. A full official cause and manner of death has not been released because the medical examiner is still waiting on toxicology results. Results officials themselves have said could take a couple of weeks or longer, depending on lab capacity. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lynn told CNN directly that the swimsuit recovered on the body matched the one Nolan had been photographed wearing earlier that same day. There is no dispute there. It's so far the single fact in this timeline that both the family and the official investigation agree on without qualification. What they don't agree on is what that fact means for how he ended up in the water in the first place. Ben Crump has said publicly, more than once, that Nolan was a genuine athlete in peak physical condition, a strong swimmer, and that at a crowded holiday beach with hundreds of people scattered along it, it isn't the kind of place a strong swimmer simply disappears from, unnoticed. Coroner Lynn has offered a different frame, telling CNN that the current on that end of Horn Island runs strong, and that stretch of the Barrier Islands has a documented history of drownings over the years, independent of this specific case. Brian Trasher of the United Cajun Navy occupies a position that sits between both accounts. He said publicly that the rip current in that area on July 4th was strong enough that even the strongest swimmers can struggle to break free of it. And in the same breath, he's wondered aloud how, with that many people scattered across that beach that day, not a single person reportedly noticed somebody in distress. Neither man is necessarily wrong about what he's describing. The independent autopsy, performed in Washington, D.C. by Dr. Roger Mitchell and funded in part by Colin Kaepernick, has also not been made public, even though Crump has said at multiple points that he expected those findings soon. As of the most recent press conference covered in this update, the family's own attorneys confirmed they're still waiting, that the independent doctors, in Crump's words, ain't got their autopsy back either. 2 autopsies, 2 separate labs, 1,000 miles apart, and as of this recording, neither one has given his family or the public a confirmed answer. Legal analysts have noted that if there turns out to be a stark difference between what the state's examination concludes and what the independent examination shows, that divergence itself will become one of the more significant developments in this entire case, regardless of which direction it points. If the two align, that alignment would also matter, because it would remove one of the central sources of distrust driving the family's independent investigation. Until either report is released, everything else in this case, every theory, every timeline reconstruction, every piece of digital evidence, is, in a very real sense, sitting on top of an incomplete medical record. The most circulated single piece of evidence in this entire case is a short video filmed from a boat, panning across the water toward a crowded stretch of Horn Island. Somewhere in that footage, according to the family's legal team, a voice could be heard demanding a phone back. Something close to, "Give me my freaking phone. What are you freaking doing?" Attorney Ben Crump told multiple outlets in the case's early days that his team believed that voice belonged to Nolan. For a large portion of the public watching this case unfold online, that claim was treated almost instantly as confirmed fact. It became one of the most repeated and most dissected details of the entire story. It has since been directly disputed. A friend named Trayvon Shepard came forward publicly to ABC News and said the voice on that video is his own, from an entirely separate, unrelated altercation with someone else that day, and that Nolan isn't even shown in the footage. He's described being physically calmed down and helped off a boat during that altercation, and said Nolan was nearby in the water, out of frame, at the time. At a later press conference, a reporter pressed Crump directly on whether that quote could actually be confirmed as Nolan's voice. His answer was noticeably more careful than it had been earlier in the case. The original claim, he said, came from one witness. Since then, another witness has come forward disputing it. Other witnesses have described entirely separate altercations that day. His team, he said, now has audio experts working to try to determine, if possible, whose voice is actually captured on the recording. And as of that press conference, the question remained unresolved. Crump also said something worth repeating plainly, because it's a real and meaningful correction. Going forward, his team would be more careful to frame single witness claims explicitly as claims, "This is what a witness told us," rather than presenting them as confirmed fact. If you're still hearing that original clip repeated online as settled fact, that's worth remembering. Drop "corrected" in the comments if this is the first time you're hearing about the walkback. That is a genuine correction, on the record, from the family's own attorney, involving one of the single most emotionally loaded details in this entire case. It's worth knowing because the original clip and the original quote still circulate widely online, as though they were never revisited. Shepard's fuller account adds more context worth including here. On the question of the phone itself, he said there was nothing suspicious about how it ended up separated from Nolan. That everybody in the group left their phones on the boats that day, protected from salt water and splashing, and that when they didn't get in the water, people put their phones on the boat's dashboard alongside roughly 15 other phones belonging to other people in the group. He's also said plainly, and on the record, that the reason Nolan stayed behind was that he'd met a girl that day and wanted to keep talking with her, planning to catch a ride back later with another boat in the group. Nolan's parents, through their attorney, have responded to Shepard's account with more grace than internet discourse around this case usually allows. They've said they've never personally met him and that they can't discount what he remembers, that they welcome every account because what they actually want, before anything else, is the truth. Separate from the disputed video, there's the phone, the physical device, and what happened to it after Nolan went missing. This detail doesn't depend on anyone's memory of a chaotic afternoon. When Nolan was reported missing, his phone wasn't with him. It surfaced in the possession of one of his friends. Christine has said she and her sister tracked the device themselves using a family location sharing app and located it at a friend's residence, rather than being handed it directly by anyone. When she and her sister accessed the phone, both of Nolan's Snapchat accounts were completely empty. No saved photos, no saved videos, even though by her account, Nolan reliably documented gatherings like this one, and even though that kind of content should typically still have been retrievable within the app's normal 24-hour window, some text messages appeared to be missing as well. None of that, on its own, proves tampering by anyone. People clear their phones for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with a crime, but it's worth understanding what deletion on a modern phone actually means before drawing any conclusion either way. Deleted data is not automatically unrecoverable. Forensic extraction can often retrieve information off a device long after someone believes it's permanently gone. And separately, carrier-side records exist independently of whatever survives on the device itself. As of the most recent public statements, Sheriff Ledbetter's office has said it never had physical possession of the phone and formally requested it for forensic extraction, while the family's own investigators examined the device first. Following the family's meeting with the district attorney's office, both sides agreed to something significant: a mutual, simultaneous inspection, meaning the family's forensic experts and law enforcement's experts will examine the device together at the same time, seeing the same data pulled the same way, specifically so that neither side can later dispute how the other's process was handled. This arrangement matters more than it might first appear. In cases where there's already a trust deficit between a grieving family and local investigators, a joint simultaneous digital examination eliminates most of the disputes that would otherwise follow over chain of custody, over whether anything was altered, over whose forensic findings deserve more weight. Everybody watching the same screen at the same time removes almost all of that uncertainty. It's also, according to legal analysts who've discussed this case publicly, a fairly unusual arrangement, one that likely wouldn't have happened without the sustained public and legal pressure this case has generated. On the morning of Wednesday, July 15th, Christine and Elmore Wansley sat down directly with Jackson County District Attorney Angela Myers-Rath and members of her office for the first time since their son's body was recovered. Ben Crump was with them, along with attorney Eric Hertz, who is leading the family's independent investigative effort, and attorney Liza Park. Afterward, the legal team confirmed two concrete developments. First, once the Jackson County Sheriff's Office finishes its investigation, the case will be turned over to a grand jury. Second, both sides agreed to that mutual, simultaneous inspection of Nolan's phone. Let me be precise here, because this is exactly the kind of announcement that gets distorted within hours online. A grand jury referral for an unnatural or suspicious death is standard procedure in Jackson County. It does not, by itself, mean criminal charges are coming. The district attorney's office has stated directly that authorities have not indicated at this stage that this is being treated as a criminal investigation. A grand jury is a panel of citizens, typically somewhere between 15 and 25 people in this jurisdiction, who review evidence that prosecutors present to them and decide whether there's enough to support formally moving forward. It is not a trial. There's no defense presentation in the way you'd see in a courtroom. It's prosecutors presenting evidence, and the panel deciding whether that evidence supports an indictment. That grand jury referral hasn't been received as unambiguous good news by everyone following this case. Former Mississippi Judge Carlos Moore has publicly raised his own concerns about District Attorney Rath, pointing to what he describes as her office's history in a previous, unrelated case involving a fatal police shooting, where he says overwhelming evidence still failed to produce an indictment. He's argued that a grand jury referral alone shouldn't be mistaken for progress, and has said he intends to keep watching this case closely to make sure it doesn't quietly stall the way he believes that earlier case did. A different attorney, Tyler Bailey, has offered a more measured read, explaining that a grand jury referral is actually standard, routine procedure in this county for any death considered unnatural or suspicious, not by itself proof that foul play has been confirmed or even strongly suspected. Both perspectives are worth holding at once. Moore's skepticism comes from real, specific history with this particular prosecutor's office. Bailey's explanation comes from how these referrals typically function as a matter of ordinary process. This can be standard procedure, and this specific DA's track record can still deserve close, continued attention. The real test isn't the referral itself. It's what actually happens once a grand jury receives whatever evidence this investigation ultimately produces. Attorney Hertz added meaningful detail of his own at that same press conference. He said there are still a great many unanswered questions, and that because of confidentiality protections that apply even to victims' families under the law, the family did not receive every answer they'd hoped for in that meeting. A limitation of the process, he was careful to note, rather than evidence of any specific wrongdoing. He also disclosed something that gives a real sense of scale for how much public attention this case has generated. His team, he said, is fielding somewhere between 50 and 100 calls a day from people who say they were on Horn Island that day, or who know someone who was. There was also a specific, checkable procedural grievance raised at that meeting. Under Mississippi law, according to Hertz, crime victims, which under most state victims' rights statutes extends to immediate family in a death case, are entitled to receive an incident report and certain baseline case information within a specific window, which Hertz cited as 72 hours. That window had long passed by the time of this meeting, and the family still had not received that report. This is worth separating out from every other claim in this case, because it isn't a matter of competing witness accounts. It's a statement about a specific legal entitlement and whether it was met on time. Christine added a detail worth including in full. She said the last time anyone from the sheriff's department had actually communicated with the family before this meeting was the previous Tuesday, and that contact wasn't even initiated by the sheriff's office. She was the one who sent a text message asking for an update on her own son's death investigation. Following this meeting, the district attorney's office agreed to take over as the family's primary point of contact going forward, through a dedicated victim advocate. Christine has said she appreciated that the office acknowledged responsibility for the communication gap that had existed, though it's worth noting plainly that this acknowledgement and the plan to fix it came only after the family's legal team raised the issue directly in this meeting, not proactively from law enforcement beforehand. On Monday, July 20th, Nolan Wells was laid to rest at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs. Visitation ran from 9 to 11 that morning, with the service beginning immediately after. Christine made a deliberate choice about how she wanted that day to feel, and she said so directly beforehand. "We want to celebrate Nolan," she said. "He would not want us sitting around crying, so what we're going to do is kind of have a party to celebrate him." That celebration of life was held afterward at the Jackson County Fairgrounds, open not just to family, but to former teammates from every level of Nolan's football career, coaches, classmates, and notably to media as well. She let the cameras in deliberately, saying she wanted the world watching. Reverend Al Sharpton officiated, at the family's request. Tyler Perry covered the funeral costs in full. Colin Kaepernick's contribution had already covered the independent autopsy. There's a detail worth including here that hasn't gotten much attention. The Mississippi Coast Coliseum and Convention Center's own commission had actually voted unanimously to offer their venue for this service. The family ultimately chose Centerpoint Church instead, and the Coliseum responded with real grace, releasing a statement saying they support the family's decision and remain committed to supporting them and the broader community through this difficult time. That exchange, a public venue offering itself, being turned down, and then responding with warmth rather than any hint of offense, says something about the broader community response to this case that's easy to overlook amid everything else. This isn't just a family fighting an investigation. It's a family being actively supported, in concrete, practical ways, by institutions and individuals who never knew Nolan personally, but were clearly moved by his story. For anyone unable to attend in person, the service was live-streamed in full, meaning people following this case from anywhere in the country were able to witness it as it happened. Think about what that actually means. A funeral is, in almost every ordinary circumstance, one of the most private, intimate rituals a family goes through, a closed circle of grief, shared only with the people who actually knew the person being buried. This funeral was the opposite of that. Broadcast live, watched by an audience that had spent over 2 weeks debating GPS data, contested witness accounts, and viral videos, now invited to witness the actual human cost of everything they'd been following. Christine specifically reached out to Coach Les George to make sure former teammates from middle school through his time at Southwest would be present. She publicly thanked local officials who she said had been checking in with the family nearly every day since Nolan's death. She addressed anyone planning to demonstrate near the service directly. "If you're having protests, even the day of his service, I am asking you to just keep it peaceful. Nolan would never want any type of violence." And she had a message specifically for Nolan's friends. The same friends whose accounts of that day remain at the center of so much public dispute. "Please just take care of your mental health," she said, "because I know this is a lot. It's a lot for us, and I know you guys are feeling some of that too." That last detail is worth sitting with. In the middle of demanding answers, in the middle of a grand jury referral and a joint forensic inspection, in a fight against fabricated online content, this mother also made space, publicly, to acknowledge that the young people who were on that island with her son are carrying weight of their own. Before we close, it's worth addressing something directly, because it has become its own problem inside this story, separate from the underlying facts of Nolan's death. Multiple established outlets have reported on how much false information has filled the silence while both autopsies remain pending. A pool party photograph that spread across social media, claiming to show Nolan alive after July 4th, was independently investigated and traced through photo metadata to June 27th, 8 days before the 4th, and before Nolan ever stepped onto that boat. A friend, Trayvon Shepard, confirmed the date and the people in that photo directly, separate from the metadata evidence. Trump himself has acknowledged that his team reposted that image without authenticating it, specifically to ask the public whether anyone recognized it, not as confirmed evidence, and has said his team's social media consistently labels reposts as reposts, for exactly this reason. The viral video and quote we discussed earlier went through a similar arc, an unverified claim, treated as settled fact within hours, followed weeks later by a direct, on-the-record correction from the very attorney who first shared it. If you see a claim circulating right now stating that either autopsy's results are already out, especially one describing a specific, dramatic new finding, treat that claim with real skepticism until it's confirmed by a named source that can actually be checked. That gap between an emotionally invested public and a slow, careful medical and legal process is exactly where fabricated claims tend to spread fastest, and this case has already demonstrated that pattern more than once. Every rumor that later turns out to be false doesn't just waste attention in the moment. It makes the real findings, whenever they finally arrive, harder for everyone, the public, the family, and investigators alike, to trust. Here is a complete, honest ledger as of tonight. Confirmed. The boat's full. Documented movement from a 9:56 a.m. departure to an 11:14 a.m. arrival at Horn Island A. 3 p.m. distress call, independently corroborating a genuine mechanical failure aboard the boat. A 4:31 p.m. departure from the island that closely matches the earliest public account of that afternoon. A 5:44 p.m. return to the original dock, formal identification of Nolan's body through dental records. A case now formally headed toward presentation before a grand jury. Once the sheriff's office investigation concludes, a joint simultaneous forensic inspection of Nolan's phone, agreed to by both the family's investigators and law enforcement on-the-record cooperation, with investigators from several individuals connected to the boat and the day's events. The FBI's confirmed limited role supporting Jackson County, and specifically addressing interstate threats made against people connected to this case, Katie's direct in-person account to Christine, an assumption based on a real conversation, not a first-hand claim about what happened afterward. A confirmed procedural gap in which the family did not receive their legally entitled incident report within the required window, unresolved. Exactly why Nolan wasn't aboard the boat when it left the island, whether by his own choice, as one account holds, or under circumstances that remain more complicated theorems. What happened during the roughly 90-minute window between the last confirmed sighting of Nolan and the boat's eventual departure, whose voice is actually captured on the widely circulated video, still under review by audio experts what content, if any, was actually deleted from Nolan's phone, and by whom, pending the joint forensic examination, what both the state and independent autopsies will ultimately conclude about cause and manner of death, the specific content of the threats the FBI has confirmed but not detailed, and exactly who received them. Important to note, no cause of death has been officially confirmed. As of this recording, no individual has been named a suspect. No charges have been filed against anyone in connection with Nolan Wells' death. His parents are still waking up every single morning to the same question they've been asking since the night his friends came home without him. Not as an accusation aimed at any one person, but as a plain, unbearable question any parent in their position would ask: what happened to my son? The toxicology results are still pending. The independent autopsy findings have not been released. The formal grand jury process has not yet begun. When any of those things actually change, not before, and not based on whatever spreads fastest online in the meantime, that's when this case will genuinely move forward. We'll bring you that update the moment there's something real, sourced, and confirmed to report. Not a moment before. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of where this case actually stands, hit that subscribe button so you're here for whatever comes next. The autopsy results, the joint phone inspection, and whatever the grand jury ultimately decides. Drop a like if this helped you understand what's really going on, and leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching from, what you think about these latest developments, or if there's something you think we should be paying closer attention to. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. His family is still fighting for him. He is remembered by teammates as the guy who celebrated other people's wins as loud as his own. By teachers as the kid who made sure nobody in the room felt overlooked. and by his own parents as a light they are still, 18 days later, trying to find a way to talk about in the past tense. We'll be back with more as soon as there's more to share. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you in the next one.